We're talking with Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, the German pulmonologist who has been one of the few calm and informed voices in the international corona scare. We will be talking about the virus, the tests, the numbers, the risks, vaccines, and the absence of any need for a new normal.
Yes, I'm Wolfgang Wodarg, and I worked a long time as a physician in public health, and I also worked in clinics and in private ward. So I have lots of experience in practical medicine. And after that, I also was elected in the German parliament. So I learned a lot about health politics, and I was in the Council of Europe. And there I was confronted with a big problem. It was the swine flu, and I very early saw that something was going wrong with this swine flu, that it was not really a pandemic. So I made an enquete commission there, and we found out that there's a lot of corruption in WHO. So I'm rather used to looking very skeptically at pharmaceutical companies and what they do and how they try to fearmonger again and again to sell their vaccines or to sell their pharmaceutics. So as a doctor, I know pharmaceutical companies, and I know them also as politician. And there is really many reasons not to trust them.
So from many different perspectives, you have a history with the subject, not only as a doctor, but
Yes.
also from the political view. And you crossed, how would you say, you crossed weapons with important players in the current corona affair as well, like Dr. Drosten, for example. Can you tell us briefly something about that?
No, we didn't. We'd never discussed directly.
Okay.
And nobody wanted us to discuss directly. I heard from people that you should do it, but the journalists didn't want it. So I don't know why.
Okay.
But I would be interested, because there are many questions open, and so I think what he did, he was just an instrument for having all this campaign started. And he was a good instrument. He's a sunny boy, and people like him because he's very, very sympathetic, and he speaks as a scientific, but he leaves out many things. And for me, it's a little bit, the way he explains his microbiological matters. We were speaking like when I was a student, we were laughing at those specialists who only saw the world through their microscope and saw the world through their instruments. There were specialists, on one hand, very skilled specialists, and on the other hand, they did not look around. They did not understand what they were doing and what they were part of. So I have a more, as a practitioner of public health, I have a more holistic approach to public health problems. And this is why I was very skeptical when I heard him first, and I did not understand why he just chosen this coronavirus to threaten us, because I know coronavirus many years, and they never play a very important role. They were almost forgotten for 15 years. There was SARS, and it was also Mr. Drosten who said this is a very important thing. Yeah. I did not follow up the SARS matter so much. But then the SARS was forgotten for many years, and suddenly he comes again with some coronavirus. And I did not understand it, because I immediately looked at what was last year, I compared and tried, did something change? Are there some numbers where I can see it? So we have very good center notes from the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin, and they have more than, I think, 300 wards of practitioners all over Germany. And every week they send their data, and they send the data about people with respiratory illnesses, acute respiratory illnesses. So it gives a very, very fine picture from October to April, and you can see whether it gets more or it gets less, how many people go there because they have cough and they have problems with it.
What's the German name for it again? Because I don't know. It's the the grippeweb, or is it?
Yes, it's grippeweb. It's one thing, and the other is Influenza, Arbeitsgemeinschaft Influenza.
Oh, yeah.
There are two. There is a special for instrument for influenza because it's the only respiratory disease where you have a vaccination. Mm-hmm. There is a vaccination against influenza, and it has to change every year because the virus change every year. The viruses they are very very quick in adopting new situations. If they see that there is no chance in growing, because people get vaccinations, they change, and next year they have a different appearance, and they can grow again in our respiratory mucosa. So there is this monitoring of which virus will come, which influenza virus will come. Yeah. And in this monitoring, there are also other viruses that are monitored. There are rhinoviruses, para-influenza viruses, and they are all monitored, but corona was not even monitored because it played no role up to now. And so I look for other countries, whether they do it, whether they have the coronavirus in their whether they observe it in the observations. And I found that the Glasgow people, that they are very, very skilled and did a very good experiment. They did it for several years. They monitored all seasons of viral diseases, respiratory viral diseases, and you always saw there are some rhinoviruses, they spread very fast. Mm-hmm. And after that, there comes influenza, and after that, there comes some. I have a picture I show you. There come influenza, and at the same time, a little bit later, there have been coronaviruses. It's just a small margin and on the hill. It's just a small amount.
Every season, again, you have this sort of sequence. First the rhino, then okay. Mm-hmm.
Corona always comes a little bit later, so it comes in a new year, and it comes when the spring starts, like you can say. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was all the years like that. And then I had a look, and I found some people who are in hospitals and in special hospitals I know, and they told me, "Oh yes, it's the pediatrics. They watch the coronavirus because there are very young children that get infections from coronavirus, because the pediatrics, when the child is ill, they look for any bacteria, any virus, what could be involved, and so they have a very broad spectrum of research, and it's in the whole world you could find pediatrics who found out what is the share of those coronavirus in the spectrum of respiratory viruses. And it was almost constantly, it was about 10%. It was in China, it was in Africa, Madagascar, Niger. Everywhere you found this 5 to 15% share of coronaviruses. So, and the same in Glasgow. And so I was not surprised that there were coronaviruses now, and they were said to be very dangerous.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit on your views about that? Because probably a lot of people that will watch this episode don't know you and don't know your earlier explanation. So it's very valuable what you tell us now. But it's important to understand a bit the scope of what we're talking. We have the virus, and you're going to tell us about it. Whether it's every year, it's part of the viruses that are sort of renewing and just spreading over the whole world. And then we have I would like to talk to you about the tests as well.
Yeah.
But also about the disease, which is connected with the virus. Is it actually, does it make sense that they are connected? What do you think about the disease? But a lot of people, of course, they say like, whoa, it is really way more. Also, medics say we have not seen this happening. So there's quite a lot of
yes. You have to distinguish.
Yeah. Something special.
The virus itself is just mixed up with other viruses. In 50% of all the illnesses the virus is participating, there are at least two viruses. So it's very rare you have a single virus who does it when you get ill. So very often there is influenza and there coronavirus. Both they are joined, and so you don't distinguish because it's this. There is no pharmaceutical product who can help. So you just have to see that people get well again, and you wait for 2 weeks, and then mostly it's done. But
for example, Dr. Wodarg, if you can look at graph number 5, maybe that's from a Dutch source.
Yes,
I think it sort of it tells something about the spread of the found viruses, and you can see that there are many of them, but all of a sudden influenza seems to just stop. Is the influenza wave just over, or what happened?
This is just the same results the Glasgow people had.
Okay.
Just exactly the same. It's just a different way of graph, but it's just the same. And you see the wave, the dark wave, you see where the influenza is, and then you see afterwards, you see the red, which is the coronavirus. And before you have rhinovirus, which is the room, when you have your nose is running, and this comes before, and then the nose stops running, and in winter you start coughing, and you get a bronchitis or from influenza, and in the end again you get something from a corona, but you cannot distinguish this. This may be some coughing, this may be some nose running, this may be some sore throat. This is typical symptoms, and you know that only with all those viruses, it's always dangerous. We say that with old people who are very ill, who have cancer, who have heart failure, heart problems, for them, we say very often, as a doctor, we say this, those viruses are the guide to death. They help people die. It's a very, 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 very soft way dying because they get fever and they are victims of those viruses. But it is death. It is death when you're very old, and then this is the way death comes. This is not the reason why you die. The reason is because you have cancer, you have diabetes, you have all those weak things in your body.
The final thing that pushes you over.
It's just that your body gives up. Your body gives up when you die, and when your body gives up, the viruses can grow better. And this is, they carry you over the river, this is just what happens then. And if you just look how many people are dying with such viruses at the end, over 80 or older even, then you see that many, many people will do so. You find a big, big portion of people dying with those viruses, but you never seek for them. It's not normal to seek with 85-year-old people to look which virus is just growing there. It's absurd. You don't do it.
For my information, there's never a influenza, lab test on people that died. That just doctors know they got infected. That was the last thing that happened. Okay.
When they lie in bed, when they cannot stand up anymore, the lung is the blood through the lung goes down to the lower part of the lung, which is close to the bed sheets. This part of the lung is not well. The lung is not well provided with oxygen, and so there are many disturbances and many weaknesses because of lying in bed very long and being ill. So such things, they play a big role.
And so why did the world decide to start testing and then find out this is corona that apparently
it is always the trick. When you want to make a panic, you do it like this. You take some virus which has been always there, like H1N1 with the swine flu in Mexico. In Mexico, it was a firm. It was called Veratect. It was a firm which you could buy. You can buy their services. And they went around, I don't know for who paid them, but they went around to hospitals where the people are very ill, and they took samples. And they were looking for H1N1. And they knew they would find in 30% of the patients, it was published before, they would find it. And then when they had found 400 cases, they made a big ado about it. They called the media in Mexico, and they ran around with this thing in front of their mouth. and they had film teams, and they made a very big ado. And when 600 cases were collected, which is not much in a region of Mexico where there live 20 million people in Mexico City, and so when they had 600 cases, they made the alarm, and the WHO said yes. They calculated Mr. Ferguson, who is still now in London. The same guy made. I have this calculation of Mr. Ferguson where he just multiplicated the 600 cases with all the flights from Mexico City all over the world, and he calculated how the virus was spread and in which time it was spread, and it was had millions of deaths. It was such a panicking, and I was very much aware of this, and I did not understand what was going on. And now they did the same in Wuhan. There is a hospital. There is an 11 million town with big hospitals, with many ill people, with pneumonia every year, always. And when you go there and look for some virus, you would like to find, you can't find them. And they found some, and they had not even 50 cases in an 11 million, in a town with 11 million. Afterwards, they did not even take those people where they found coronavirus. They also take the people who had the same X-ray appearance, so you cannot distinguish coronavirus from other viruses. So they just had they collected some, and then they made this ado, and they said, oh, it's very dangerous.
And can you tell us a little bit about how is such a test made? Because we've heard explanations, Dr. Kaufman, for example, who just sort of told us how the RNA was extracted, and then it was
not extracted. The virus was sequenced, genetically sequenced in Wuhan.
Which means for the people
they had the RNA was sequenced. They had a sequencer, so they could
numerical code.
They got the 30,000 molecules. They had all this, and in the computer.
Yeah. And
there is a special centralized computer where all those virolog people, they put their findings, and so this virus was put there, and immediately. Professor Drosten in Berlin, the same day when the virus was put there, he already had prepared, and he was already looking in his computer what could match with his findings in Wuhan, and he constructed such a test then. And such a PCR test is just that you look for some piece of the virus, some sequence there, a typical sequence you think is typical for the virus you search for. And he was taking some SARS viruses. He did not know the virus in Wuhan. He didn't have it. It was never isolated.
Still not. Is it okay? Is that correct? That it's still not isolated, or only back then, or is it?
Now we have many sequences from many SARS viruses after Wuhan. Those 4 months, there were thousands of new, different SARS viruses. They had changed in the meantime. They change very rapidly. They exchange molecules. They drop off molecules. They take others. They recombine, and while they are living, and so they were collected all over the world, and they were found. Such similar coronaviruses were found all over the world in animals and in human beings. Now, 15 years, nobody looked for them. Since SARS. Nobody was interested in coronaviruses. Nobody watched them. And in the last 4 months, from Wuhan to now, suddenly everyone observes how fast they can change. They must be stupid if they don't know that they changed as fast before too.
But what in your mind? I have to rephrase there. You say nobody looked on coronaviruses before. No one tested it for us. But a lot of people say, but look at the symptoms. Look at what happens to people. That gave us reason to look into it. So, how do you see that? Is there a difference, or is it only perception?
As a physician and as someone who is checking such illnesses and who tries to make up his mind what was going on afterwards. So when you're on court, when there's a struggle between the doctor and the patient, and because the doctor did something wrong, or so, you analyze.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, if you analyze, you have to watch everything that could have an influence on the health of the patient. So what is very important, how was the patient when he was still at home?
Mm-hmm.
What happened when he came to hospital? Which risks are there in hospital?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have nosocomial infections? Do they have hospital infections there or not?
Mm-hmm.
Which pharmaceutics did he get? Very important.
Mm-hmm.
Many symptoms we hear now are side effects of the pharmaceutics the people got. They got high dose of cortisone.
Mm-hmm.
Very dangerous for people. If you have a virus infection, maybe it makes the virus infection much worse. Or they got antiviral drugs which interfere with the RNA too. And they got all the drugs they got, they were not licensed for this diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
There are no drugs against COVID-19, against coronavirus on the market. All drugs we use are not licensed.
And what made
authorized.
is it only in your opinion, what made that people started to, because I'm trying to stay away from speculation and who did this because of what, because you can certainly discuss about that, but it's sort of hard, and you have a lot of knowledge about the facts, so I think that's really valuable to zoom into. But what made the Chinese, for example, totally different maybe powers there, seemingly panic as well, and have doctors panic and try stuff? What is it, only perception, or is this coronavirus that is now sort of the new one, is it a little more aggressive strain than last year's, or how do you see this? Or is this just the mixture of corona, influenza, whatever is spreading right now?
When in the midst of February, or beginning of February, I started observing the numbers we got from China. Mm-hmm. And I started the count. I observed the counting of cases, and I did not know how many tests they did. Nobody said how many tests they did. They only said how many positives they found.
Yeah.
They called it cases. But we know if it's not a case, it's not an illness. If the test is positive, it's just a positive test. Many people who were tested, and they felt quite well, and they did not have any symptoms. So what we recognized, it was a counting and mounting of the test number, positive tests. Mm-hmm. And this was frightening what we saw. Mm-hmm. And it just was a mirror mm-hmm. of where and how much they were testing. They were in China. I observed the other provinces too in China, and where they did not have a test, there were no cases. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what is very funny, in March, China stopped making tests. Mm-hmm. They didn't test people in China anymore, and suddenly SARS was gone.
How does that? Because there was this story about a second wave in China only 2 weeks ago. How does that connect to this one?
Yes, the Chinese, they said, oh, there are people coming from abroad, and on the frontier where we still do this testing, there we found more.
Okay.
But within China, they don't do any tests. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like this, they could it's incredible with 1.4 billion people that you look at Europe. You cannot just switch off such an illness, such a spreading illness. And mm-hmm. even if you make isolation, if you make all this, you cannot. But in China, it was possible. And it was possible because they stopped testing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because there was no pandemic. They were just looking for positive findings, and they had some ill people. As always, they had old people dying with pneumonia. If you see the pneumonia death in China, mostly old people. There is some very good statistics about that. Yeah. And so what they did, I think the Chinese, they just tricked us. They just were clever. They made a big panic for the world. And then they said, oh, we stop this now. And they lived as they could very, very quickly, or they could go on living as always. Mm-hmm. And everything was very cheap for them. They could buy oil, they could buy resources all over the world. Everything was very cheap.
Okay, possible, whatever ground for them to maybe decide it. In my opinion, I would say probably quite a lot of people do have incentives to whatever emphasize chaos, emphasize panic, but the majority of people, doctors, people, professionals, even scientists, probably have some of a genuine belief, probably, and they just want to help people. How do they got sort of embedded in this whole feeling of panic? And so there was only one vision, I think. And
how do you know they were embedded? Because how do you know that they did not just obey? In China, maybe they just obeyed. Everyone did what was expected to do.
Oh, in China, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can imagine. I mean, just like the Italian doctors,
Yeah.
German doctors, Dutch doctors, people who I believe are 99.9% good people who try to do best and still
Yeah.
make maybe the wrong guesses, the wrong choices sometimes. What made that happen?
I did not make I did not make a sentinel. I didn't ask many doctors. I just get many emails.
Yeah.
And hundreds of emails from doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, you're right. We don't see anything. We don't know what's going on here. It's just less than always in the hospital. It's just less in my ward. People don't come. I don't know where the pandemic is. Many doctors said that. Many nurses said that. And on the other hand, you saw those nurses in the Spanish and in the Italian hospitals and the doctors there, where there was big panic, where suddenly, in Italy, you have had in 3 years ago, you had the same. You had in all the media, it was chaos in hospitals. There was scandals in hospitals. Many people dying, more than this year. Mm-hmm. It was a lot. And this was without any corona and anything else. It's just because the hospitals, they're very dangerous in Italy because they don't have enough staff, they don't have enough money, they have very high nosocomial infections. And what is additionally a risk in Italy was that many Italian families, when they have old grandfathers, old grandmothers in their family, they employ people from Eastern Germany very often. They don't bring people into the asylum, for old people, but they keep them at home and they employ. Or the old people themselves, they employ someone if they are able to help. Mm-hmm. And those people, they left Italy when it started. So there were many old people without care. And when you are without care, you get helpless. And when you are helpless, it's very easy that somebody brings you to hospital.
Okay.
And when you're 80, and when everyone is afraid of COVID-19 and makes a test and they find something, then you're in the intensive care and you're 82 or so, and you will be killed there. This is what happens. And on the other hand, you saw all those frightening pictures from those coffins in Italy. In Italy, it's not normal that people are burned when they die. Normally, they are buried.
Yeah, of course.
And now it was forbidden to do it, so they had to be burned. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have those facilities to burn the people, so they had lots of coffins waiting for being burned. Mm-hmm. And there were nice photos to be made. So it was all blown up by many factors. And there's one thing. In Italy, they were looking for, and as in Spain too, and I was doing research on this now lately, they were looking for some remedy they could use. Yeah. And in Italy, more than 70% of the patients, and they got hydroxychloroquine, preventive or as therapy. And even the doctors and the nurses, they took it.
Okay.
And if you have a certain enzyme defect, which is very often in Sardinia, for instance, in Italy too, in Sardinia, there are 20% of the population has this defect. And in the rest of Italy, perhaps 5 to 10% have it. And in Africa, there are 20 to 30% of the people have this enzyme specialty, which is glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, it's called. Or they call it favism. It comes from the beans because there is some toxic stuff in the beans for them too. So when you have this enzyme defect and you take the dose that was recommended by Chinese specialists to take this dose of hydroxychloroquine, you get a hemolysis. So you get your erythrocytes, the red blood cells, they just blow up, they just are destroyed, and you suddenly don't get breath anymore. It's like it is within 1 or 2 days, you just get breathless, extremely breathless.
I think that accounts for a part of the mortality that occurred in Italy as well. We're just worried that people will medicine in the future.
You have to calculate that if you do it in a Mediterranean country like Spain and Italy, or in Turkey, or in Israel, or in around the Mediterranean, then you have to calculate that you have up to 10% of patients who will be severely damaged if you give them this, and they will have exactly this breathless. And they've been if you're a doctor in intensive care, you don't think of it. You just intubate, you make intubation, and you kill the people because they don't need intubation. They just need taking away this hydroxychloroquine, taking some air through the nose, some oxygen through the nose, or with a mask, and wait for some days, and then the red blood cells are restored and are rebuilt again, and the breathlessness goes away. So you don't need intensive care like that. But if you do intensive care, if you intubate, you kill them. And this happened in New York, where you have the double number of black patients among the deaths.
Is that so? Yeah, there is some data on that. Okay.
There is lots of data about that. Okay. It's all over UK, all over in UK too, in London too, always in the big cities. And I think in Holland too, you have this problem.
We have quite a high mortality compared to Germany, comparable to Belgium, but we do not very well in Europe.
But did anyone look for this? Did anyone look for how many of those people come from countries where their ancestors used to experience malaria? Because there, in those countries where there used to be malaria, or there is still malaria, you have lots of people who are at risk when they get hydroxychloroquine.
Is it only with the hydroxychloroquine treatment, or does this have is it only when people are treated that way that their risk was higher, or is it also connected to the COVID symptoms that were maybe deadlier for them?
There is a publication that coronaviruses also make some hemolysis with some people. But when you see the case studies, or when you see the examinations of the pediatric hospitals in Africa, which I worked, it was not obvious that this played a big role. There was one Chinese theoretical. They did not make clinical research. They did not make research with patients, and they did not really look for histories of treatment, but they just made in a computer experiment that this coronavirus structures could fit into structures from the erythrocyte, and this could make a hemolysis. But it was really theoretical, and they published it in April 2020.
Okay. So you're telling us that a lot of the differences in mortality could be created by other factors. You're telling us that coronaviruses are always there in approximately 10% of the cases. No one ever looked, and now people started to test for it. Do we test, if a test is positive, what does that mean? What does it sort of indicate? Because people say they have been tested positive, then they test negative, so you cannot gain immunity to corona. It's even more dangerous than we think. Can you comment on that?
Yes, the test is just picking out some molecules, some sequences from a big virus, which the one who made the test thought they are the right ones, they are important. And Mr. Drosten, who made this test with his group, he said that his test would also be positive with some SARS viruses, which are already frequently and spread over whole Europe. And they were in animals, in bats. So he knew they were the SARS viruses that have already spread. I don't know where, and he did not tell what animals they had those SARS viruses, but he knew that they were in some bats, in European bats. And there, if you take this test, he said it would be positive. And it would not be positive. He made some to prove that the test had a certain specificity. He proved that those viruses we know and we identify with other tests we use already many years. With those viruses, his test was negative. So he excluded about 6 known viruses. And he said, I can exclude them. They are only positive with SARS viruses, like in bats, okay. And nobody knows where they have been spread already in Europe. Nobody has ever examined, not in the computer. And so he sent his test to Wuhan, and he sent it to the clinic there. And the Chinese colleagues, they called him and they wrote him, yes, the test is positive. It works. So, and then he went to WHO. WHO said, very good test. We take it now. We recommend it all over the world. And since then, the colleague of Mr. Drosten, he's an author. He's also author of this work, of this scientific report. He now produces it, and he earns millions with it.
Okay. Yeah. So
because there are conflicts of interest, it's not with Mr. Drosten, but with his colleague for sure. Hundreds of millions he earns with it. So I think it's So I don't see this through.
I see the incentive there. It's pretty huge. But for people to sort of understand this, if you're testing positive for corona, it actually means you test positive for a certain strain of coronaviruses that have been around for quite a while, have been spread around through bats, maybe to people as well.
Whatever, within 4 months since Wuhan, they were found everywhere in Europe. They were found in many different species, not only in humans.
Yeah.
So, and you have read perhaps that the test was positive with tigers, with the cats, with bats anyway, and with several other animals. So the test is not specific. It's just showing SARS viruses. And nobody watched which SARS viruses were already here in Europe before Wuhan. Nobody knows it.
Yeah, so nobody could know because we never looked.
Nobody was interested. So he was sure to have a test that for sure will show a lot here. When you use it, you will find it. And what I was observing, all the cases we found when we started in February in testing here in Europe too, all the cases we found were directly parallel. If you do some tests, you had a certain quota of positive tests. And the more tests you do, the more positive cases you have. But it does not get higher than 20% of positivity. So when you do 100 tests, so you get 20. When you get 100,000, you get 20,000 tests positive. So
why did nobody look at that fraction? Because I knew I followed you back then already. It seemed very logical. And still, it was not a very high-rated key indicator. For example, what is the percentage of tests that are positive?
We were looking. We were following some Mr. Witkowski. He was speaking about this herd immunity. Yeah. And he making this. I have this on my homepage too. It's very good thing. But it's very theoretical. And it's not specific for coronavirus, I think.
He's talking more from a statistic, mathematician standpoint, I think. but then
But
specialized in.
yes, it's very good because the schematic how such a wave runs and what happens in such a wave is very good. But you know, the coronavirus never gets in herd immunity more than 20, I don't know, perhaps 30%. Never.
Oh,
Not even in the whole history in Africa and everywhere. The coronavirus doesn't need this. It comes. It comes back.
We all know now since a few weeks, because we're all educated, we need 70% herd immunity to be safe.
No. You will never have this. You will have this with rhinovirus. Yes. And if you see, just have a look on the Glasgow on this picture that we have where they observed those viruses. You see, rhinovirus is going up until 80% every season, and the coronavirus is something on the slope, but only such a small thing. And influenza too does not have 80%. Never. They don't need it.
But can you explain why we don't need? Because we all understand, okay, we have to put in healthy people between the virus and the vulnerable. So that is the idea.
You know, the virus.
Why don't we need 70% there?
Yeah, because coronavirus gives a shit on human beings. If there are no human beings, it goes to cats. It's so easy for them to change the host.
Okay.
So if they travel around the world, they hitchhike with whatever they find around the world, and because they can put on a different dress.
The 20% immunity is already too.
That's
then
it.
They switch.
We just gave them a hike for some days, and they are on the way.
Okay.
Wherever, in living beings all over the world, and they will be in Africa from April to September. We know it. And they don't need 80%. They don't need 80%. We don't need 80%. We're just a host for some time.
Okay.
We gave some bed and breakfast for them.
Okay, so we established that the virus is all viruses are new every year again. Corona were always amongst them. We never looked for them. This year we started to look for them, whether the Chinese began or whether something was special or whether it was just bad luck and someone thought it was nice to have a very well selling test. Let's put it that way, maybe. What is interesting, of course, because it is impacting life in a huge way, and that is also a part of a discussion that I would like to sort of briefly address with you, maybe later on. But also, so we have got all kinds of measures. What is the reason behind it? The sanity of it? What did it do? Did it actually influence in a way the spread of this thing, which you say is not very special, but clinics say and some medics say, wow, this I've never seen before?
You know, I'm not only a doctor for pneumology, for lungs, but I'm also a specialist for hygiene. And as I was director of a medical public health institution, I always had to decide hygienic measures, whether a kindergarten has to be closed or whether something has to be done or disinfected or whatever, all such things. They were my daily bread. And when you do such a thing, you have to watch out that you don't do more damage than good. And so the indication for such measures, they are very important. And to separate people from the others, to quarantine them. I also know this because I was Port Health Authority in Hamburg, in the port. And I know when something happens on the ship and there was some break, the ship was not allowed to go on.
To enter the harbor,
Yes, so had to stay in water. And so we do this very rarely. And if you have such a respiratory disease, which is so easily spreading, it's already spreading before you get sick. When you are infected, you start already spreading it before you really feel, well, something is wrong.
So people say that is different from, by the way, that is different from influenza, because then you feel sick immediately. And so that's the reason why influenza is less.
It depends which kind of influenza it is. There are also different types. And sometimes you feel it very hard, sometimes you don't feel it at all. So there's a variety too.
Okay. Okay.
And but nevertheless, those respiratory viruses, it's very difficult to separate people. Let's take another virus, the herpes virus.
Yeah.
You know the windpox, you know them?
Yeah.
When the children get those bubbles on, and when they spread, they are called windpox because when you open the window, they go to the next house.
They are that volatile, sort of. Yeah.
They go with the wind. They are very easy volatile. They are volatile, and with the respiratory, people go to work. They did not tell us not to go to work. We still could use the subway, the buses, and so in the beginning. So the virus was already spread. And when the lockdown started, it was a big nonsense. It didn't serve for anything. It didn't help to stop the spread of the virus. And when you see the graphic, it's number 14.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah, you see two waves. You see two waves in this graphic. One wave last winter.
Yeah.
You see a very broad mountain.
Yeah.
And the mountain this year, there is the slope on the right side is broken. It's shorter. So it's the big mountain is the mothers with the children up to 4 years old going to the doctor. And you see in this winter, they stopped going to the doctor after 12 weeks. The last year it was 18 weeks they went to the doctor. So 1/3 was cut off by the lockdown. So it means that children, mothers and children with some symptoms or so, they had something, they didn't go to the doctor anymore. But we don't know the effect of this. We don't know whether it's damaged the people or not. And it is the same with the old people. They don't go to the doctor. You see that it's cut off. And maybe this is damaging a lot. And
if you have a look at the graph number 20, for example.
Yes.
Also from the Robert Koch Institute.
Yeah, so the reproduction rate, they were discussing a lot about it.
Is it a relevant graph in your opinion, or is it or it's just a discussion?
I think it doesn't say so much because it is also dependent on the testing, how much you test. And you have a big mistake there when you don't say have not standardized the testing and what you look at and what you observe and what you forgot to observe. So this graphic, I think you cannot use it. Okay. The other graphic that we spoke about, 14, 15, it's very hard data because people were at the doctor's or they were not.
Yeah.
So also the next one, number 16, is very important. It's just how many severe respiratory diseases were in the hospital. And you see, there is no change, even less this year. You see the red curve. You see the age groups again. Even the old people didn't go more frequently to the hospital than last year in Germany. So where is the severe disease? You don't see it.
I have since your first interviews, I've been watching Euromomo statistics quite fiercely, and every Thursday afternoon I was like, okay, next week's coming up, and last week they had this whole redesign thing, and I don't know, the timing is a bit peculiar.
For me, Euromomo was the first instrument I recognized that I could use.
Yeah.
Afterwards, I know that the death rate is registered in Germany by the Länder, by the 16 regions of Germany, and they bring it together. And in our days, where we have the computers and internet, it should be very fast transported and centralized, those data. But I don't get such data from Robert Koch Institute. So what state do we live in that we don't have the mortality data with such easy to count thing? Someone is dead. He gets a certificate that someone is dead. It's given to the administration, and that's it. It's within one day. Each day you could say how many people died. You could give it in the computer, and Robert Koch knows. It doesn't exist. So we go to Euromumu. Euromumu is in Denmark. Some specialists there, and they collect data, but they don't give the raw data. It's very intransparent for me. I trust it.
Administrative. It's not an administrative cause because it's
no.
Okay.
It's a group.
Certificates are made up every day and just within a centralized system. I don't
know why they reshaped it, and I don't know. I think I'm very skeptical with this data now.
Yeah, I think you turn out to be pretty skeptical, maybe because you are going through this. You have so.
And if I believe them, okay, I say they are right. The numbers you see in some states of Europe, you see the cases going up like it's a peak, it's a pike, it's like this, a very sharp mountain.
Yeah.
And only in UK the mountain goes up and stays high a little bit longer. And in Ireland, it's funny. In Ireland, in Southern Ireland, it's like this. In Northern Ireland, there's a mountain. Why? So if it is the virus we observe, there should be no difference in the countries.
Yeah, because it cannot be something that you say, because it changes so quickly that Ireland has this different strain, which
Germany and Netherlands, not possible. It should be the same in Cologne as in Amsterdam, if it's a virus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But there's a big difference, and of course there's a.
It doesn't explain the differences, and it's when I saw in Italy it was started first, and then it started in Madrid, and I was very much after it. And there's so many factors that could have been you could make responsible. There's the therapy, there is the environment, there is the age, the medium age, very old people in Italy, and there is the number of, as in Sweden, you see that most of the people when they're the 15 first people who died, 6 of them came from Somalia. Why? Young people from Somalia, why did they die? Did they get hydroxychloroquine? It's never mentioned anywhere. This would be an explanation.
Yeah. I can imagine.
But I want to have the data. If I was a state attorney, I would immediately get all the data from the hospitals and examine them. You people are killed, perhaps, by a therapy which is not. It's not allowed, not licensed. It's just for clinical trials. And clinical trials, when you look at WHO homepage, you find 1,200 trials starting for COVID-19 from January to now. 1,200 trials worldwide in this WHO register.
Wow. Okay.
Can download them.
Yeah.
There are 820. When I just looked, I did not look them all through. I'm not capable. But I made some search, and I searched for hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, and I found 820 hits. And then I looked for glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. For all the forms how you express it, favism and all the expressions used. Yeah. And if I put them all together, I did not find even 100 where it was mentioned. And in each clinical study you do, you have to say which patients you want to include and which patients you want to exclude, not to have false results. So those patients should be excluded, and they are not. In more than 700 studies registered in WHO, and nobody speaks about it.
Are you the only one that is sort of?
I started, and perhaps there are 2 or 3 now starting and discussing it. And I think that the WHO will recognize there's a discussion, and then they will take about the data. They will take away the data bank, and they will do something, and they will phone, and I don't know what they will do. But it's a crime if if a doctor does not think of this and gives this deadly drug to someone who is weak.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
big,
it's so
big
valuable that you share
mistake.
this with us. Thank you very much. It's yeah. So does it make you sort of more worried as a person, or more how would say
I'm
geared up
angry.
for the fight? So are you
I
more
am. I imagine. I looked in. I was responsible in the German Bundestag
Mhm,
for my party in
mhm,
the Committee for Economic Development and Cooperation. I was responsible for Central Africa. And I made many journeys and I visited projects in Congo, in Ethiopia, in about 6 or 7 countries.
yeah.
And I know that they have very, very bad medical care facilities there. And it's a drama if somebody gets ill. Very often, if you're not very rich, it's a very big problem.
Mhm,
And I see and I read that they start ramping up the production of hydroxychloroquine to
mhm,
fight COVID-19
mhm, mhm,
in a country where the prevalence of this enzyme deficiency is 20 to 30% of the population, mostly the male population.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. So
So
hugely
when they
affected.
start testing, they find some people, they find, as always, 10% of the population positive.
Mhm,
And they are watched and they give it preventively, like they do in the studies. They give them preventive drugs.
mhm,
They have those people dying in their hospitals. They have all this misery. They can make a film and they can feed the fright of the people. They will panic the African population with it. And the politicians who make the lockdown, they will say, yes, there they are, the dead people. They use this to produce dead, to produce ill people. This is what my mistrust, and I want to get rid of this mistrust.
yeah. Yeah.
And if
It's
you want to get
not
rid of
going
it,
to happen. Yeah.
so why just I tell those African governments, watch it, don't give it,
Mhm,
exclude this, exclude the people,
mhm, mhm.
and
Is
don't.
it easy to
And
test for the deficiency? Is it easy
yes,
to? Okay.
yes, just if they make clinical trials and they watch out that there are no high risk people are given this stuff.
Then you will
Okay,
be in favor of, because it is also people say, yeah, you can have the really expensive stuff against COVID, but this hydroxychloroquine is it's
and
pretty affordable. What is it?
you don't need studies with several 100,000 participants to find this out.
Hmm. Hmm.
You can do this somewhere in a good quality, and you will find out with 3,000 or 4,000 people in this clinical study, you can find out what you want to know. But
Hmm.
it has to have good quality. What they do now is observational studies.
Hmm.
So they don't even have a control group, and it's all allowed.
Hmm.
It's just spreading the drug. We have observational studies in Germany too. You know, when the pharmaceutical, I know this because I worked in transparency, and we dealt with Transparency International. And when I was head of
Yeah, yeah. There was news out that you were even temporarily suspended from the board or something.
yeah, there were some influential people who succeeded to kick me out. This about transparency.
It was, yeah, it felt pretty sad that even for an institute like Transparency, this very
I'm a mem-
transparent
I was
process
I'm,
were
mem-
taking.
I'm the member of the board who is the longest of them all in the board. I'm more than 10 years in the board.
Yeah,
They asked me to come in the board because of my swine flu work.
yeah,
I did not go there. They asked me, would you please come and work with us because you did such a good work against corruption at WHO?
yeah.
So I was there. I was immediately at the board. I started working all the time. I started leading the working group on health.
Yeah.
And we had one of our topics was this observational studies. We found out that they use it for as a seeding studies. They use it to seed to bribe the doctors. The
Oh,
doctor gets some. The doctor gets something if he takes down notes how the patient was doing with the drug, and the doctor gives this to his secretary, and the secretary fills in some, and the doctor gets some money for his cooperation.
hmm.
And he doesn't use the drug he normally uses, but he takes the drug from this firm who gives him some extra money for study.
Mm.
And
Okay.
with this trick, 30% of the drugs are marketed.
And you were fighting this kind of.
I was fighting publishing this, so I know pharmaceutical companies and how they work.
Mhm.
And it was just this observational studies. They had no value at all. They were not published even.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and this is what they do now with this dangerous drug too. They do observational studies, and WHO says, okay,
Mhm.
they kill people with it.
So that's very important for you to get out there this message to
Yeah.
anyone
Yes,
in positions that they can influence.
we have to tell all those organizations of doctors
Mhm.
that they do wrong when they use it like this. When they don't think of it, they do wrong.
Mhm.
They hurt people.
And are they still fighting something that they should not fight? Because that is, in my opinion, sort of still hard. Are doctors always fighting flu, respiratory viruses in their best way? And they are also trying to do now, and they are now maybe taking the wrong decisions? Or
Yeah.
is it so much influenced by panic and other factors that
No. If you have a doctor you can trust and you knows you and you want to go there again and he knows you and he cares for you, then he won't give you antibiotics when you have a virus infect.
Mhm, mhm,
And because he knows that maybe you have fever, he watches you.
mhm.
When if a good doctor says he watches out whether there may be some bacteriological superinfection, which is very often with weak people or people who get cortisone or get anti-immune therapy, immune depressive therapy. So he has to watch there. And if he has the impression that the fever does not go away in a certain time, or if they get too much mucus or yellow mucus or something happens extra, then he gives antibiotics.
Yeah.
But normally the antibiotics don't help. And you can see when there were well-educated doctors, they give very, very little antibiotics in such a virus period.
Okay.
And but in Spain and in Italy, immediately antibiotics. Everyone is coughing.
Because of the panic, in a sort of overreacting.
They are used to have this thought, oh, I'm ill, I have to take pills. And if the doctor is not good, if he does not give me strong pills, I need strong pills. But it kills people because the side effects are always there. If you don't need strong pills, they do so much damage.
Hmm. So how do you see it for now? Because we are taking up some time of you. So let us know if you're running out of time. We really appreciate you taking the time. But if you have some more space, would be nice. What do you see? Where are we actually right now? The wave is sort of way over its course in Europe. It's
Yes.
probably already. So where is the wave going, and what should we do? What shouldn't we do?
I think we should just forget it. We don't have any problem with any infection now anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But we should watch what happens in Africa. They start having the time of the virus.
There is a chance we create our own panic in
And the rest yes, the rest is politics. Has nothing to do with medicine.
And whole Europe is still in sort of semi-intelligent, semi-non-intelligent lockdown, social distancing. Your Bundeskanzler Angela Merkel, let's say she is sincere and tries to do the best for her country, probably.
I don't think so.
Okay, that's hard. Okay. So yeah, that is already. But even
Because
if she was, that is the only way that you can explain her taking the decisions that she is taking.
I think what they want to do, that they want to have a passport, whether you're immune or not. And if you're not, and they want to forbid things. If you're not immune, you have to show your immunity that they allow you to do things, to go somewhere, to work something or so. This is horrible.
Yeah. So this goes.
What the pharmaceutical industry wants for 10 years already is our data, our health data. They do it with apps, they do it with, and the German health minister, he's a lobbyist for pharmaceutical industry. He has had a lot of lobby firm when he was my colleague in Bundestag. He was 25% of a lobby firm for pharmaceutical companies. Now he's the minister. And since 1 year, he makes one law, passes one law after the other, he brings to the parliament, and they do it, that the people have to, the doctors have to give all the centralized to a central data bank, all the data of their patient, what they get, which diagnosis, which pharmaceutical products, and all the X-ray and everything is prepared. And they even prepare it for genetic testing. Such a file, a private file from each patient, and it's in a centralized data.
So very credible, of course.
This is what happened last year, and what they do now. He goes on that he makes an app that he knows that you can track people who will contact with whom, and they say it's because we have to fight the infection. It's not. They want to have the data because the data is gold for the pharmaceutical industry. It's the new. That's what they say. It's the new gold. They make congresses about the new gold data, big congresses, and there's so many firms. They produce those apps and they know what to do with the. And they make all this analysis.
I can see the big incentives for big corporations there to try to influence politics and decision makers.
Yes.
I cannot assess whether
you don't need lobbyists. You don't need lobbyists anymore if you have the minister who is a lobbyist.
That's pretty powerful. Yeah, I can imagine.
So if you're clever in the industry, if you're clever like Bill Gates, he goes to the chancellor. In former times, the pharmaceutical industry went to each doctor to bribe them. Then they made contracts with the health insurances. Good for them. Then they went to the health minister, and it gets cheaper and easier for them the higher they go.
They scale up. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine what you're saying. So I think it's very hard, and also for people watching to sort of. To consider that, and maybe you are right, and of course that I would say at least the influence of a Bill Melinda Gates Foundation as being one foundation with such tremendous power, and even when they would be 100% sincere in their goals, then still it would be not a very smart thing to do, to give it all into one hand and one voice and one vision.
No,
But I can imagine that a lot of European governments are just generally misinformed or well-informed or scared. They are really scared. They make some decision that might turn out to be a medical disaster and people get killed again. So
I observed this when I was the head of the Committee on Health in the Council of Europe, where you have 47 states in Europe. Russia was there, Turkey was there, not only European Union, but 47 states. And I was the head of this committee for health, on health, when the swine flu started. And I recognized how all the different states reacted on this. And many of them had made contracts with the pharmaceutical companies for vaccines, for pandemic vaccines. And the contracts were secret. Mostly the parliamentarians didn't even know that their state had a contract like that. I heard it from some whistleblower as a parliamentarian from Germany. So it was no discussion in parliament about such contracts. The government made contracts, and the German government made contracts for 40 million people, with vaccines for 40 million people from two firms, from Novartis and Glaxo. And other states made with Sanofi and Baxter. And so there were many contracts like that. And all the contracts had one thing in common. And the contracts was written in case the WHO says there is a pandemic and the level 6 is reached, then those contracts will be in power. So the WHO was on the trigger for all those contracts. And when they pulled the trigger, they had the states had to pay. And there is one minister of health who didn't do it, who said no. She was a public health. She used to be a public health doctor. It was the minister of Poland. The minister of Poland said, no, this is a nonsense. I don't believe that there is any good in this, and this vaccine is much too dangerous. It is not. There have not been enough clinical trials, and so she said, "No, I will protect my people from this."
Wow.
She was the only one. So a health minister can do that.
So okay, so these times, maybe because I think we're coming into maybe a phase of the conversation, how to go forward from this.
Yeah.
We need Poland ministers. We need
Yeah.
a lot of people are talking about like intelligent exit strategies, and I would like to
the Dutch people.
about what is intelligence, how can we learn from this, and what do we need to do as decision makers, politicians, and
As we go, the Germans, we go to our health ministers and say, "Don't do this. Don't subscribe that we get some vaccination, which is only produced in a very short time, which is a very, very new method, which has not at all been sufficiently experienced. There's no experience with RNA vaccine for infectious diseases." And Bill Gates, he is crazy. He is crazy. I can't understand how someone can say this with 1.5 year giving to 7 billion people a vaccine that has not even been controlled whether there may be some cancer. You need 5 years to find out whether a cancer grows or not, at least. And if you change RNA, if you change the intracellular structures, what they produce, you hope they produce something you want, but you don't know. It is far too complicated. So this is why you need very thorough clinical studies and observe such a thing for a long time if you install such a new method of producing vaccines. It may be different with vaccines, when you produce them on eggs and you do always the same procedure, you only have to discuss about the virus you use. But now you have to discuss about the whole method and the complications that come up from the whole method. So tell your health ministers in each country of Europe, tell you, please protect us from those idiots, from those crazy people. They want to damage us. They do not want us good. It is not possible.
And do we need to, because I think in this whole Corona crisis, there is this self-fulfilling circle in media, in the general public, being scared, being the scare is being emphasized. People in charge, politicians, are also scared, probably taking the wrong decisions and being. So this is a circle that enforces each other. So we have to ask our ministers: do we have to inform them better? Do we have to protect them against maybe making the wrong decisions? What if this decision turns out in a way we will not quote unquote kill you for it, because this was you need some kind of courage, probably, but also a feeling of not trying to punish each other, but to you understand what I mean. So how do we build that? Where do we start, and where does the good circle start?
There, in our states, I think it's in other states too. If there is not a dictatorship where they rule with power and they have direct power, but in our states, in European states, I think the politicians are dependent on what majorities think and do, and so politicians always strive for power. This is what they have to do. This is the first motive to do something. If I do this, I will have more power. This is how politicians always have to think. It's normal.
Their incentive is power. Yeah.
And so we have to show them as a people. We have to show them with what they get power and with what they lose it. And so we have to say, if you do this with us, you will lose power. And this is very important. And when all parties do it, like in Germany, when there is no opposition anymore.
In Holland, the same. Yeah. All right. So yeah.
We have someone who is now founding a new party. Dr. Schiffman, he's founding, and he has already 100,000 followers, members of his party. This is more than the Green Party, more than the Left Party or the smaller parties in Bundestag. So maybe, I don't know whether this party will function because the party doesn't know, the people don't know each other.
Very vulnerable, of course. Yeah, yeah.
They may be very surprised who all is in this party, but it is complicated to have the process of making a program and to shaping the face of a party is very difficult. And but nevertheless, it shows that many people they will be very critical when the next election comes, and we have to sharpen this.
Yeah, because it's even on the contrary sometimes. I think that the people sometimes really appreciate drastic measures and a leader that takes decisions and puts measures in place, because if the feeling is these measures protect us from the danger that is out there, then it's very so even I think Merkel, but also our Prime Minister Rutte, their ratings go up because they are putting the power into place.
But I think people recognize from more and more that they are cheated. There is nothing to be protected.
How did it? Because I think there is a sort of, you feel that also there is a wave going in the panic, and it is way more possible to have these kind of conversations now than say a month or one and a half month ago.
Yes.
You were marginalized as well, and
I was destroyed completely. All what I did, my whole life was gone. I was just someone with an aluminium hat, and I was just some.
How did you survive that? I have thick skin because of that, sort of developed.
Yes, when I do something which is wrong, and so I don't hurt anyone. There is no one interested when I do something wrong. When I say something is right, which could change something, I think then I have the impression that I was just touching the right spot, and that they were very sensitive. They were afraid. They didn't think, oh, this old man, now it's 10 years ago that he did such a thing, that he remembers this and this, he's still there. And there are not so many people who are critical. When you're in a job as a specialist in a university, and I've been very afraid of, all those people who now are heads of institutes, and so they will lose their jobs. There's so much power, they won't get money anymore. And all the third-party money on our universities, and in medicine, the big money coming from pharmaceutical industry for many researchers, and so the careers will stop, and it's very difficult to tell somebody that he is to make him understand that he's wrong when his salary depends on that he's not understanding.
It's a saying, I think, even. It's true, I can imagine. But it didn't stop you, or because it did not stop you either when your salary was depending on it.
I'm not dependent on such money. I'm not dependent. I have my career still going on. My students like me. And so that's all I need.
Okay, so thank you very much. We probably have to find some place to wrap this up. Is there anything that you want to tell, like, normal people besides what you just said? Pressure your health ministers, or educate yourself, or listen to certain people, or whatever.
First, don't be afraid of the virus. Then look who is the parliamentarian in your region. Do you know them? 50% don't know the names of their parliamentarians. Go there with your neighbors. Ask them, what do you do? Why do you do this? Tell us. Can you explain us? So in a democracy functions, and when people will be very much, think of your children. They will get some dangerous vaccination. They may be damaged for their lives if you don't do this, if you don't engage, if you don't look for your parliamentarian who's responsible for all those decisions. So people, wake up. Don't leave it to Bill Gates.
Great, great. Thank you very much. I will leave it with that, and I thank you very much for your time in Greece. I think even
In exile, you can say.
in exile. Yeah. Was it that bad that you actually stayed there because, or you were not allowed to fly back? Or
No, there was no plane. I'm not. It's not possible. I cannot.
you cannot even. Okay.
And I have someone who needs care, and I have with a wheelchair, and so it's not so easy to go back. With a car, it would be easy, but the frontiers are all closed.
Okay, okay. Now I can imagine. I hope you have a great place there.
I don't suffer.
Certainly be watching you, and maybe we'll reach out to you again. But it was really lovely to have you in the conversation here. Danke vielmal und schönen guten Abend. War sehr, sehr, sehr schön.
Vielen Dank für das gute Gespräch.
Ja,
Thank you.
danke, Wolfgang.